The sole mechanic, Elias, pulled off his oil-stained gloves. Manager Valerie Stone slammed the termination notice onto the steel bench. "You are slowing down my metrics, Thorne. Your time here is done." Elias wiped his hands on a rag, offering no argument. Valerie ordered the shop locked immediately, fixing a closed sign on the main gate at peak business hour. 30 minutes later, the harbor's peace was violently shredded. Two immense naval helicopters descended, a sight of authority and catastrophe. Their rotors tore the air, leaving everyone stunned and silent. It was a sudden reversal of fortune, a true game-changer, a defining moment that exposed Valerie's deadly mistake and proved Elias was absolutely indispensable. Elias Thorne, 45, possessed the quiet expertise of a man who dealt in certainties, not guesswork. He was the dockyard's technical memory, a walking encyclopedia of every engine, every wiring diagram, and every structural vulnerability of the vessels that passed through the repair shop. For 15 years, he had anchored the yard's operations, working silently, his reputation built on solutions, not self-promotion. He held no modern certifications. He had no interest in office politics. He simply fixed what no one else could. He lived a life of deliberate simplicity, supporting his small family with hands that carried the indelible scent of diesel and competence. He was, in a quiet corner of the harbor, indispensable. But Elias carried a secret history, one that explained his absolute self-possession under pressure. Before the dockyard, he had been a highly decorated aviation electronics technician in the Navy, specializing in tactical engine maintenance. He was the man who kept multi-million-dollar military assets operational under hostile conditions. His career was a masterclass in controlled chaos. He had resigned honorably a decade ago, trading the high-stakes military theater for the quiet permanence of the sea-level dock. His exit was fueled by a personal tragedy, a close call that taught him the value of an unscheduled, present moment with his family. The quiet dockyard was his penance and his peace. His true wealth was not measured in salary, but in the time he spent helping his children with homework, his focus a solid, immovable mass. Then came Valerie Stone, 29, armed with a fresh MBA and a fierce, almost predatory ambition. She was appointed to modernize the struggling yard. For Valerie, the yard was a stepping stone, and efficiency meant maximizing short-term profit. She saw Elias not as a unique asset, but as an anachronism, an obsolete technician whose meticulous, time-consuming quality checks choked her beloved profit margins. He didn't fit her glossy vision of the new streamlined facility. Before firing him, she had tried to discreetly download his knowledge, requesting detailed written summaries of all his proprietary maintenance shortcuts. Elias, recognizing the trap, provided only the official, standard operating procedures, protecting his unique, intuitive knowledge. The simmering conflict boiled over when Valerie aggressively cut the standard engine maintenance time by 40% to push more ships through the pipeline. Elias pushed back, respectfully but firmly, citing critical safety tolerances. He warned her that bypassing necessary inspections was not efficiency, but negligence. He had pointed specifically to the crucial, yet overlooked, diagnostic ports on the older fishing trawlers. "If we skip this check, Ms. Stone," he'd warned, his voice low, "we will miss the early pressure differential warning. It will lead to a major hydraulic failure, not a minor leak." Valerie, dismissing his concerns as old guard resistance, saw it as an open challenge to her authority. A few days later, a trawler's main hydraulic system failed catastrophically offshore. While Valerie immediately attempted to spin the story, Elias had already managed to walk the remaining crew through a rapid, temporary fix that salvaged the vessel. Valerie took full public credit, citing her proactive risk management, while internally confirming her need to eliminate the one man who could expose her fatal technical flaws. The pretext for the firing was a trivial, minor hydraulic line leak on a different fishing trawler, an issue that Elias had been preparing to fix during the scheduled downtime Valerie had eliminated. She seized the opportunity. In front of the entire crew, she publicly excoriated him, framing the minor delay as a catastrophic failure of discipline and a blatant sabotage of her timeline. The humiliation was calculated to establish her dominance. Your archaic processes are costing this company money, Thorne. She'd sneered, her voice echoing off the steel walls. Your reluctance to adapt shows your commitment is to yourself, not the balance sheet. Effective immediately, you are terminated. The finality of the words, the public nature of the dismissal, felt like a physical blow. The other mechanics shuffled their feet, lowering their gazes, silently acknowledging the injustice but too afraid to intervene. Elias simply nodded. His eyes, usually warm, were now distant and hard. He walked straight to his small, battered locker. His most profound act of dignity was not to argue, but to quietly take down the sole personal item he kept there, a faded photograph of his two children, smiling wide on a summer beach. He tucked it into his jacket and walked out, leaving behind 15 years of loyalty and a depth of specialized knowledge Valerie would never comprehend. His departure was a silence more deafening than any shouting match. The moment Elias's old pickup truck pulled onto the main harbor road, the crisis arrived. The urgent blast of a foghorn signaled the unannounced, high-priority arrival of the USS Defender, a multi-purpose military patrol vessel, pulling into the dock with its engine sputtering violently. A grim-faced naval officer informed Valerie, who was still basking in the glow of her dictatorial power, that the ship had suffered a catastrophic engine control module failure during a critical surveillance mission. The Navy demanded immediate, absolute repair. The ship needed to be operational within 4 hours. The fate of the mission, involving sensitive international waters, hung on this timetable. Valerie, her confidence fueled by ignorance, instantly accepted the contract. This was exactly the kind of high-profile, high-dollar job her metrics craved. "Consider it done, Commander," she declared, gesturing grandly to her remaining crew. "Our team is the best in the harbor." The Navy commander, Major Thompson, simply looked at her with an expressionless intensity that spoke volumes about the seriousness of the situation. The celebration lasted exactly 7 minutes. Valerie's best team rushed the engine room, but the sheer complexity of the military-grade dual-thrust system baffled them instantly. The Defender's engine was a specialized hybrid, far beyond the scope of their commercial training. This wasn't a commercial engine with a mechanical fault. It was a complex military system that had initiated a digital choke, a self-imposed lockdown due to a specific, almost undocumented sensor sequence error common only in a specific generation of naval assets. This error required not brute force repair, but sophisticated diagnostic sequencing. Soon the ship's internal alarms began to wail, not just a failure alarm, but a security alert, indicating a problem so deep the system was threatening to seize up completely. One of the senior mechanics, flustered and pale, staggered back to Valerie. "Ma'am, we can't even access the diagnostic protocols. This isn't a repair, it's a system rebuild. We don't have the schematics, the training, or the clearance. We're locked out." The timestamp on the commander's mission clock glared mercilessly. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at Valerie's polished composure. The 4-hour clock was ticking down with brutal, unforgiving speed. Major Thompson stood nearby, his face a study in controlled fury, watching the crew flounder. He did not yell. His silence was more terrifying than any shouting. Then her corporate phone started vibrating ceaselessly. It was the regional director, demanding an update on the high-profile military contract. The pressure was immense. Losing this contract meant not only a catastrophic financial penalty, but a public relations nightmare that could derail her career permanently. She tried to explain the situation using the theoretical jargon from her MBA. "We are experiencing an unforeseen bottleneck in resource allocation." But the commander merely raised an eyebrow. The language of business meant nothing to the language of survival. Valerie snapped at her men, demanding they simply try harder. But their fear was too great. The engine was an alien beast. They feared breaking it more than they feared her. She knew, with sickening certainty, that she was totally out of her depth. She retreated to her office, desperately flipping through the yard's outdated personnel files. There had to be someone, anyone. She called competing yards, offering astronomical sums, only to be met with immediate refusals. The Defender's engine was too niche, too specialized. Her calculated world of spreadsheets and efficiency was crumbling in the face of raw, technical reality. Out in the engine room, a young mechanic named Marco, who had trained under Elias for 2 years, looked up from the uncooperative console. He saw the genuine, raw despair on the faces of his senior colleagues. He knew the truth. He quietly approached Major Thompson, lowering his voice so only the military man could hear. "Sir, there's only one man in this entire harbor who has the specific expertise to access and override the fail-safes on this system. Only one man ever worked on systems like this here." Marco hesitated for a crucial beat, knowing the cost of his words but choosing integrity. He knew how to crack that digital choke. He used to call it the ghost protocol. The commander's eyes narrowed. "And where is he?" Marco glanced instinctively toward the main gate, now ironically padlocked and sealed with the closed sign. "He was fired 30 minutes ago, Commander. Ms. Stone terminated him." "So?" The commander stared at the locked gate, the information hitting him like a physical blow. The irony was devastating. Valerie, overhearing the exchange, rushed out, her voice regaining a desperate, brittle authority. "That's confidential, Marco, and irrelevant. We are using our current resources." But her denial was weak, desperate. The commander ignored her, his attention now fixed on the single essential piece of data, the fired mechanic's name. Meanwhile, Elias was driving home, his mind already shifting gears from the humiliation of the yard to the quiet routine of preparing dinner for his children. His old work phone, which he kept active for freelance editing, was vibrating with an unknown number. He glanced at it, frowning. Another client. He was not in the mood for editing. He reached out and simply turned the phone off, deciding to deal with it later. He missed the call, the one call that would have solved the problem quietly. He missed the desperate, pleading voice on the other end. He did not know that the failure he had predicted was now threatening a major national security mission, and that the stakes had just gone from corporate metrics to military crisis. The commander did not waste a second arguing with Valerie. He instantly accessed the Navy's internal database, using his satellite link, cross-referencing the specialized engine failure code with the facility's historical technical logs. A step Valerie, focused only on commercial revenue, didn't even know was possible. Twist 1. The revelation. The database flagged an immediate hit. A technician named Elias Thorne was officially listed as the certifying officer for the maintenance of several specialized naval components dating back years, including a similar dual-thrust module on a sister vessel during a critical overseas operation a decade prior. His Navy history, which Valerie had dismissed as obsolete, screamed off the screen: Chief Petty Officer, Tactical Avionics Maintenance Division. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a highly trained, former military specialist, uniquely qualified for this exact high-stakes crisis. He had been the ghost in the machine, and now the machine was demanding its ghost back. "Get me air assets. Now!" Major Thompson barked into his secure radio. "I need an immediate intercept. Target is the former employee. He is critical to the national security mission." The urgency in his voice was undeniable. 30 minutes after the dockyard gates had been mockingly closed, the air became thick with noise and tension. The two massive, powerful military helicopters, a sight unheard of at this commercial harbor, swept over the dock, their downward thrust whipping the surface of the water into a frantic, white frenzy. The wind from the rotors violently rattled the closed sign Valerie had just erected. They didn't land on the ship. They landed squarely on the concrete pier, right in front of the locked gate, completely dominating the space Valerie had just claimed as her own. The shock was immediate. Everyone, the remaining mechanics, the ship's crew, and the frantic Valerie, froze, watching the event unfold in paralyzed silence. The entire harbor stopped. A senior naval officer, Captain Davies, in full-dress uniform and sunglasses, descended from the first helicopter, walking with slow, deliberate steps toward the humiliated shop floor. The commander from the Defender pointed a steady finger at Valerie. Captain Davies stopped directly in front of her, his voice amplified by the rotor's roar. "Ma'am, we are here on urgent executive order. We are seeking Chief Petty Officer Elias Thorne." Valerie's jaw dropped. The shame was a physical, electric current. She was speechless. The man she had publicly humiliated and discarded 30 minutes ago was now being sought out by the highest levels of military authority, and they were using his old rank. Her ruthless efficiency had just threatened a national mission. The silence from the crew was now actively judging her. Elias's pickup truck, flagged by the second helicopter, which had spotted him on the highway, pulled back into the yard moments later, forced to return by the sheer, undeniable authority of the military escort. He stepped out of the truck, his face impassive, a technical genius dragged from his peaceful life. He walked toward the group, his eyes immediately assessing the defender and the engine failure, ignoring the human drama entirely. Twist 2. The retaliation. Captain Davies wasted no time. He looked directly at Elias, ignoring Valerie completely. Chief Petty Officer Thorne, you are urgently needed on the USS Defender. This is an unscheduled, mission-critical deployment. We require your expertise immediately. Elias looked from the officer to Valerie, who was now just a shell of her former arrogance, her eyes wide with terror and pleading. The moment was his. He finally broke his silence. Commander, I will assist, Elias said, his voice calm, ringing with absolute authority. But not as an employee of this yard. I have been summarily fired, and the facility has demonstrated zero commitment to technical safety by prioritizing speed over necessary procedure. He pointed a finger at the complex engine. My condition is non-negotiable. I operate only as an independent, certified technical contractor, and my mandate is absolute safety and quality without interference from management. I am here to fix the Navy's problem, not to satisfy a corporate quota. Any actions taken by myself supersede any prior management directives regarding maintenance duration or procedure. Valerie, seeing the enormous military figures, the blinking lights of the two helicopters, and the shattered pieces of her career lying on the pier, could only manage a shaky whisper. Agreed. Whatever you need, Elias. Please. She was forced to take a physical step back, away from the engine, away from the control she had craved. The power shift was total. The man in the oil-stained jacket was now commanding the yard's CEO. Elias walked onto the Defender, calmly surveying the chaotic engine room. Within minutes, his hands were working with practiced, precise speed. He bypassed the faulty sensor arrays and manually reset the flow controls, his knowledge of the engine's unique build allowing him to achieve in 20 minutes what a dozen men could not do in 2 hours. He didn't just fix the problem, he executed a critical override procedure that allowed the ship to operate safely until a full replacement could be installed. The military mission was saved. The Defender's engine roared back to life, steady and strong. The entire harbor buzzed with the news. Stories of the 2 Navy helicopters landing to retrieve a recently fired mechanic became an instant legend, spreading throughout the city's marine industry. For the remaining crew at the yard, the sight of their former colleague directing a military operation was transformative. The silent deference they had given Valerie evaporated, replaced by open, raw respect for Elias. They realized they had been complicit in the dismissal of their only true technical shield. Valerie, now relegated to the role of a humbled spectator, was immediately placed on administrative leave by the regional director, Mr. Davies, no relation to the captain. Davies arrived visibly furious, not because of the expense, but because the crisis had exposed profound structural rot. Valerie was subjected to a grueling internal review focused solely on her reckless decision to fire Elias. Cornered, she was forced to admit the entire motivation was tied to her flawed, short-term revenue goals. She had prioritized corporate image over the functional integrity of the yard. Mr. Davies, sitting rigidly in the suddenly quiet, cavernous office, looked at the numbers. Ms. Stone, your efficiency just cost us 2 major civilian contracts this morning. Clients heard about the military response and immediately pulled their vessels, citing unstable management and unproven safety protocols. They didn't care about your spreadsheets. They cared that the only man capable of preventing catastrophic failure was fired for being too thorough. The financial loss was immediate and crippling. Valerie tried desperately to claw back some dignity. But the metrics were trending positive, sir. My projections showed a 15% increase in throughput within Q3. Davies cut her off with a single sharp gesture. Throughput on non-functional vessels is a liability, not an asset, Mrs. Stone. The only metric that matters in this business is seaworthiness. You traded the reliability of the yard's work for an illusion of speed. That failure in judgment is fatal to your position. The Navy, true to their word, sent an official letter of commendation to the yard, specifically naming Elias Thorne as the individual whose unparalleled technical expertise and decisive action averted a major operational delay. The letter publicly validated everything Elias represented and everything Valerie had scorned. The yard managed to keep the lucrative Navy contract, not because of Valerie's MBA, but purely on the technical prestige restored by Elias's intervention. The company, facing the prospect of losing the entire military and high-end commercial market, was desperate to retain him. Mr. Davies's face, usually calm and corporate, was a mask of calculated stress. He realized his entire regional operation was now dependent on the good graces of the man they had humiliated. He ordered the legal team to draft a contract that essentially gave Elias dictatorial technical power. The management offered Elias his old job back, complete with a massive raise and a title promotion. He flatly refused. "My value is not determined by a paycheck, but by my freedom to do the job correctly," he stated clearly. Instead, he negotiated a part-time role, an independent senior technical consultant, a position specifically designed to report outside the management hierarchy and with the power to veto any procedure he deemed technically unsafe. He ensured his expertise served the integrity of the work, not the profit goals of the management. He insisted on a clause that mandated the management could not terminate his consulting contract for any reason related to delays caused by mandatory safety checks. His power was now cemented in contractual stone, prioritizing technical honesty over corporate expediency. The change in the repair shop was profound. The younger mechanics, led by Marco, who had found his voice by speaking the truth, no longer sought shortcuts. They approached Elias's appointed corner, begging him to reteach the crucial, time-consuming processes Valerie had eliminated. Marco specifically asked about the digital choke override. Elias spent an hour detailing the diagnostic sequence, emphasizing the why, the inherent danger of ignoring legacy system warnings. The atmosphere shifted from a frantic, hurried scramble for quick profit to a focused, respectful environment where quality checks were again mandatory. The crew began taking pride in the precision of their work, recognizing that competence was the true power. The yard, under the watchful, nervous eye of the regional director, was forced to structurally reorganize its maintenance schedule, adopting Elias's procedures. They were buying his integrity, not just his time. Elias, while physically present only a few hours a week, had left an indelible mark. His refusal to return as a subordinate sent a clear message. True value cannot be bought or fired. It must be respected. The harbor continued its busy commerce, but the culture of the dockyard, humbled and corrected by the thunder of 2 military helicopters, had changed forever. The following Monday morning was quiet and crisp. Elias returned to the yard, not through the main corporate entrance, but through the side service door, carrying his consulting clipboard. There was no fanfare, no congratulatory assembly, just the quiet hum of machinery starting up properly. Valerie Stone met him, not in her office, but by his old steel bench. She was dressed simply, wearing flat, practical work boots instead of the sharp high heels that had once announced her authority. She looked utterly defeated, yet perhaps finally genuine. She had lost her management role, but gained a devastating lesson. "Elias," she began, her voice low and unsteady, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I wanted to build this company on numbers, but you taught me it's built on hands. You saved this yard's reputation and my career from complete collapse. I am truly sorry for my arrogance. I fired the only asset we had." Elias accepted her apology with a calm nod, recognizing the sincerity in her exhaustion. He knew she had paid her price. "The problem wasn't just the firing, Valerie. It was the principle. You dismissed safety for speed. That's why I can't return to the floor, and why you should remember the sound of those rotors every time you look at a balance sheet. That sound is the cost of rushing." The consulting contract was formally signed that morning, clearly defining his non-subordinate role. The financial compensation was significant, but the real benefit was the power of veto and the restored sense of integrity. The yard, under new, safety-conscious interim management, began to implement Elias's original maintenance protocols as standard operating procedure. This included a specific clause written by Elias himself, mandating the old lengthy diagnostic check on all older vessels, the very procedure Valerie had cut. But Elias was focused on a deeper, more permanent structural change. He wasn't just fixing the schedule, he was fixing the knowledge gap. He walked over to Mr. Davies, who was nervously reviewing the day's work orders. "Mr. Davies, the contract is good, but it's short-sighted. I am one man. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow, you are back where you were yesterday, only worse." Davies swallowed hard. "What are you proposing, Mr. Thorne?" "I need an apprenticeship guarantee," Elias stated, "a formal, mandatory internal training program. I need to select two of the best young minds here, including Marco, and dedicate 50% of my contract time to mentoring them directly on advanced diagnostics and military spec systems. You will pay them for this training time at the same hourly rate you pay me. This isn't optional. It's the cost of keeping the yard's technical future viable." He smiled slightly. "Think of it as insurance against the next unforeseen bottleneck." Davies, calculating the long-term risk of a future crisis against the immediate cost, knew he had no choice. "Done, Elias. Done. The apprenticeship guarantee is now official yard policy." This demand secured Elias's legacy, ensuring his specialized knowledge would not be lost again due to corporate short-sightedness. He had essentially forced the company to invest in expertise over efficiency. Elias walked the floor with a quiet, observant grace. He was no longer covered in grease, but the respect he commanded was absolute. The young mechanics didn't just perform tasks, they asked for his guidance, absorbing the technical wisdom of a man whose skills were validated by a military operation. Marco, now acting as the unofficial crew lead, made sure every new process was meticulously followed. The legacy he left was not a record of efficiency, but a shift in ethos, respect for the expert, the prioritization of quality, and the acknowledgement that a single person's knowledge can outweigh 1,000 corporate policies. The man who had been the quiet underdog became the silent, essential foundation. He picked up his old wrench from the steel bench, turning it over in his hand before setting it back down. It was no longer a tool of labor, but a symbol of authority. He didn't need to use it to prove his worth anymore. His value was finally, irrevocably recognized. As he was leaving for the day, he noticed a new, small plaque fixed above the time clock. It wasn't a corporate mission statement. It was a single line, authorized by the humbled regional director. "Quality is the only metric that matters." Elias smiled faintly, tucking the plaque's sentiment into the same pocket as his family photo. He had won more than his job back. He had salvaged the integrity of his profession. The harbor continued its cycle of business, the ships coming and going, but the lesson, never underestimate the quiet expert, was etched into the foundation of the dockyard forever. He had built a better legacy for his children, not with money, but with dignity. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to Single Dad Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.